Welcome back to DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, and it's a bit of a sort of mini off-season for the podcast again. We got through the 6 months, and now we've got another bit of one where we've got 3 weeks off before championship racing returns to Long Beach. So we're going to do what we said we'll do at the start of the season, which was go over storylines before I think it was the week where we had Malukas news and Nashville news breakout. So now I felt like a good opportunity to review some of the storylines over the 2024 season. Obviously, we've had one and one not really round happen so far, but there's still 16 championship rounds to go, so there's plenty to discuss for the rest of the season. Plenty of particular storylines to look over. Obviously, as we said pre-season, me and Archie wrote a piece on the DIVEBOMB website. You can find it at www.dive-bomb.com. Looking over some of these storylines. So we're going to go a bit more in-depth on them at the podcast, discuss the significance of them and what to keep your eye out for the rest of 2024. I mean, the action on track's good enough, but there's a few little stories you want to look in between there for the season.
Yeah, and in case you were wondering, Max Verstappen missing the Monaco Grand Prix to drive in the Indy 500 for Dale Coyne Racing was an April Fool. That's not happening, as cool as it would be. It went down very well on Instagram. I think it got a fair few people. That's not going to be included.
It got me as well.
But if that actually got people, then yeah,
we're sorry.
We are really sorry, but we are also really, really happy.
Yeah, I mean, they posted quite well, so thanks for your engagement on it, because we've got quite a few people. We're going to get a few comments, I think, about this time in May to the podcast, saying you said Verstappen was racing. Not quite, maybe in a few years. But even though he never said he'll do it, so you never know. But yes, that is not going to happen, unfortunately. But this brings us on nicely to our first storyline, as sort of one-off entries of the Indy 500 names we'd almost never thought we'd see in the Indy 500. And the first one is Kyle Larson, which I've titled on the website an unprecedented attempt at a fabled challenge. We obviously touched on it quite a lot in the off-season. Kyle Larson, 2021 NASCAR Cup Series champion, 2021 Coca-Cola 600 champion, obviously in a fourth car at Aaron McLaren as he attempts the double. That's obviously the Indianapolis 500 in the early afternoon, followed by the Coca-Cola 600 in the evening. So 1,100 miles in one day. No, that's too many. 1,100 miles in one day. That'd be really bold doing that many. But yeah, Larson doing 2 races in one day. It's a challenge which hasn't been done since 2014 with Kurt Busch when he did it for Andretti. But there's a very different feel for Larson, being such a high name in NASCAR. He's regarded so highly by so many different people. He quite possibly is the strongest name that NASCAR have to offer. He's certainly one of them, and he's quick. He's a quick guy, and there's a lot of anticipation towards Kyle Larson at Indianapolis this year, because he's going to be one which draws in a new fan base, and hopefully one who will be competitive.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I mean, there are so many facets to this. I'll just kind of lead with what you said at the end there, Dan, that it does kind of open up a whole new kind of spectrum of fan, bringing over hopefully some of these NASCAR fans, and yeah, they'll see the race and kind of think, you know what, yeah, I'll tune into a bit more of this IndyCar stuff. So that's part of the hope, that it can kind of help IndyCar grow to another level. But I think just the actual competition side of things, Larson is so highly regarded, one of the modern greats in NASCAR, and to see him kind of make this switch over, I mean, he's an adaptable driver. He drives sprint cars, so he's not just familiar to NASCAR. But yeah, seeing him make this step will be quite something. I mean, he's tested a little bit. He doesn't really know where he is yet in terms of whether he's up to speed, whether he's on the pace, because he did his rookie orientation program at IMS. I think it was back in October. And then a later test at Phoenix, I think was that earlier this year, maybe in December. I can't quite remember the date. But yeah, so he's had a couple of outings, one on the big oval at IMS, one on a very different track, a bit of a shorter oval at Phoenix. But yeah, he's kind of getting up to speed in an IndyCar. Obviously, his focus is on NASCAR, but come next week, cars return for open testing on the IMS Oval. So that's going to be really exciting. And that's going to be the first time that Larson has run in traffic, which is a massive challenge, arguably one of the biggest challenges. He's kind of phased into it a bit, kind of getting used to all of the different controls that you have in the car. You know, your adjustments such as the weight jacker, all the different things on the steering wheel, which obviously is not existent in NASCAR. So I think Tony Kanaan and the team have tried to really phase him into it, but he really doesn't know where he fares yet. So I think next week could be quite telling as he really gets some traffic running in, and he has other drivers, including teammates, to kind of be a marker up against him.
There's a lot of support for Carl Larson. I wrote this in the article that, he's got, as you said, he's got Tony Kanaan behind him, who is an Indy 500 legend, no less of that, obviously, won in 2013, but he's got so many starts there, as well as NASCAR legend Jeff Gordon as well, obviously being part of the Hendrick Motorsports program. So he's got a huge team behind him. He's got two massive outlets, not only in Aaron McLaren, who's obviously got the support of Hendrick Motorsports as well. Yes, they aren't as familiar in the IndyCar scene, but they're still very knowledgeable people. They're obviously very successful in NASCAR. So it's a huge sort of force of people coming together. And next week, as you said, will be very important because it will be Larson's first opportunity to see how he stacks up. But you'd hope one being in the Arrow McLaren, where they have been so strong. I mean, you sort of look at the most recent years, and it's almost a surprise they haven't won the Indy 500 yet. So will Larson go out and win on the debut? I think maybe that's a bit optimistic, but it's hard to sort of see where he stacks up early on. So I think he could be a very strong proposition. I think Kurt Busch finished 6th in 2014 off the top of my head. I might be wrong in saying that. But, Kurt Busch did very well in Andretti. And as you said, Aaron McLaren's strongest Chevrolet outlet at the Indy 500. And he's got this support, he's got this backing. And I think it will be one that not only we follow, but be one that the NASCAR fans follow. So quite an interesting dynamic there.
I think as well, just going back to kind of like the fan aspect of it all, is even if they kind of aren't into kind of NASCAR and they aren't like big fans of NASCAR, and maybe even Carl Larson, just kind of knowing what he can do and kind of knowing how big his name is, I feel like that'd just bring in loads of fans just to kind of watch it to see how it goes down. And I think it can bring the fans into like the testing, it can bring it into the races or the race. So I feel like just the whole thing will be a good thing kind of for IndyCar and to kind of get a bit of that recognition up.
Yeah, it's kind of just struck me actually that it's happening next week. This is the first real indication we're going to get of kind of where he is. Obviously, the open test is 2 very long days, but this is going to have a massive story to follow through those 2 days. And yeah, it's come up on us pretty fast. It was February. He had his Phoenix test, not December, as I suggested. There's been a lot of testing here and there for IndyCar. It was February that Larson was kind of lasting in IndyCar. I think that was just before the NASCAR season kicked off. So he's going to have to get back up to speed again. Should we get into the kind of difficult question of how well do we want him to do? Not us personally, but how well, in terms of IndyCar as a series, do we actually want Larson to do? And how well, if he does well, is that a bad reflection on the series?
Yeah, and obviously this is one we have touched on before in quite significance. It is a difficult question because, if he does well, that's potentially a whole new fan base that opens up opportunities in future years. There's not really been any suggestion that Larson will do it beyond this year. This could well be a one and done. So yes, we'll get that fan base in for the series, which is absolutely fantastic. You'd get that attention, but at the same time, as I sort of said, when Ericsson won the Indy 500, it was, oh, hang on, Ericsson was 19th in F1. He suddenly moved over to IndyCar, and now he's winning the biggest race. What that, from an outsider's perspective, that didn't give a great reflection of the series. So, again, will Larson do it? A driver who's driven stock cars pretty much his entire career. If he rocks up to an IndyCar and is one of the classes of the field, I mean, I'm sure he won't be because you've got so much talent in there. But if he's running competitively, it's like, oh, hang on, these IndyCar drivers can't be very good. So it's a difficult balance, and it's one where I think it's important for him to do well, because at the end of the day, you don't benefit from that crossover who doesn't do well. The NASCAR fans wouldn't be interested, I don't think, if he does do well. And also, if he doesn't do well, that will probably block any more opportunities for this sort of thing in future years. But at the same time, we don't want him doing too well, because that's gonna be a bad look on an outsider's perspective.
Yeah, I don't think you want him doing well enough that IndyCar kind of becomes a bit of a butt of derision, kind of, where people are just mocking the series and the quality within the series because some guy comes in from the stock car world and on debut comes and I don't know, even notches a top 5. I think even if Larson's kind of running up there on the edge of the top 10, I think that's fine. You know, he's in competitive machinery, but I think as his teammates, Pato O'Ward, Alexander Rossi, hopefully David Malukas, you would imagine. I think he must be going back to fitness now. Not sure whether he's running the open test yet, actually, but all shall be revealed in due course, you would imagine. But there's a lot of pressure on his teammates, really, to outperform him because, okay, Larson is essentially a generational talent, but he's not got experience of the IndyCar world. And to kind of come in and say he beats one of his teammates, I don't know, if he comes in and beats Rossi, that's not a great look. But yeah, at the same time, you want him doing well enough that it keeps on engaging this fan base, and maybe there's future efforts from Larson or from Hendrick. So yeah, there's a very fine balance to be struck. You don't want him going out and winning the race because that doesn't reflect well on the depth within the field of, you know, drivers who've been doing this for a long time. However, you want him to do reasonably well to kind of keep those new fans, yeah, as I said, engaged.
Yeah, certainly a difficult balance. Let's sort of stay on the topic of the Indy 500 because there will be some other changes coming into the series, to the race this year, and which we obviously also touched on to make an even more unpredictable month of May. And that's two ones we haven't got too much information on so far, but we know they're going to happen. The first of all is crossing the pit commit line to try and break the toe. That was obviously particularly prevalent last year in the final lap when Joseph Newgarden quite dangerously, but within the rules, went towards the pit lane at great speed, obviously, to try and break the toe on the final lap. And the other one being sort of what they call a dragon, which is swerving left to right in the main straight, again, in an attempt to break the toe, both of which seen as pretty dangerous and one that needs to be changed straight away. So although obviously it's great from a safety standpoint, but at the end of the day, it will make it more unpredictable because let's say the run to the line where you can't swerve out the way immediately, you've actually got quite a good battle potentially on the run to the yard of bricks, which could be quite good, especially on the final lap, for example.
Yeah, I think, again, we have kind of touched on this, but it's a necessary move from a safety standpoint. You know, if someone was to hit the pit lane attenuator at full speed, head on, it wasn't going to be good. And I think even the drivers that have deployed this, most recently Marcus Ericsson, Joseph Newgarden, they both agree with the decision. At the time, they used this tactic essentially because they knew it was within the rules. They will go as far to stretch the rules as they can to gain an advantage. But at the same time, they've realised it doesn't look silly. You know, I don't think it looks silly. It looked quite cool, to be honest. However, it did look extremely dangerous. And it is absolutely the right decision to ban the dragon and ban double moves. So I think that was the other thing they banned. So yeah, it really could cause some more thrilling action right to the line because it was a very effective form of defense, hence why drivers did use it, but that is no longer going to be possible. So if there is a tight final lap or a late caution restart, yeah, it could be tight to the line.
Yeah, you can kind of see why they've done it. It may not have been, to some people, it may not have been immediate that it needed to be changed, but all it kind of takes is one person or one kind of move where one driver goes one way or another driver doesn't know, and then they end up in the barrier, like you said, and it's could end up very dangerous. I feel like this should just kind of come in the way to make sure that doesn't happen and make sure it's a safer drive for everyone, because no one really wants anyone to get hurt, and even if it,
Yeah, we still need clarity on what the punishment's going to be, because a lot has been made of the fact that, oh my God, what are they going to do if someone does this? They cross the yard of bricks first. Are you going to strip the win away from them? Are you going to allow them to drink the milk and then strip the win away from them and celebrate? They've got to be clear with the rules, and I guess it's on the drivers as well to really respect the rules because it is there for their safety.
And there is a lot of question marks where is it, if you go 2 lines over, is that a penalty? If you go 4 lines over, is that the penalty? Where is the hard line? You could swerve to left straight after the main straight, but still avoid sort of the pick and hit line. There's a lot of questions here, which the series really haven't answered yet, to be honest. So hopefully they will do. But obviously, again, the dragon, it's been a bigger issue in the main straight rather than the back straight. Is it? How many times can you move? Is there any way to break the toe legitimately? So it's one they've obviously got to finalise the details of. plus obviously very important from a safety standpoint, as we said. But again, if you can't, from a series perspective, stripping a win from someone after all the festivities have happened as such, again, it wouldn't be a great look on the series, and it would cause a bit of confusion. We know we never like this in any sort of motorsport where someone gets stripped to win hours after the race. So they'll have to work it out. They need to see what happens. But again, yeah, it's a huge question mark, which we don't have all the information on yet, so we can't make too much of a judgment. But obviously, it'll work itself out towards May as we get ever closer.
Yeah, I think it did elicit quite a few questions when this rule was announced. I think people expected it to be announced, but the series didn't really announce it with any sort of depth. They kind of just, I think, maybe included it in some of the other rule changes and said that, you know, in their pre-season sort of rule change brief, they said that it'll be announced at a later date. So maybe they're still working it out. Maybe they're getting feedback from drivers as to what exactly the rule should be, what exactly the punishment should be, how exactly they're going to deal with it if it happens on the last lap, for instance. So, yeah, hopefully we get some more, I guess, in-depth detail on it soon enough, because it's needed, because there is still quite a lot of confusion and question marks around it.
Let's look back at last May and the turbulent month of Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan. One of the storylines we've noted is their search for an oval upturn in 2024. Obviously, we know how weak they were at the Indy 500. Graham Rahal getting bumped from the field, having 3 of their 4 cars and last chance qualifying. Jack Harvey obviously barely making the field to knock Graham Rahal out. Obviously, the Indy 500 is one that grabs the headlines, but you've got to look at the other races as well, where they did really struggle. I think it was either Iowa or Gateway where Rahal said it was the worst car he ever drove on an oval, which obviously says quite a lot. Again, Texas as a team, pretty poor, and even at the short ovals, they were pretty poor as a team, and that was what was racing at the start of the season. So, you know, how do they solve that issue coming to 2024? Will it change? It's something that they need to work on, and really hampered them last year.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it starts with May, and obviously May was the big story as well. Yeah, it does cover all of the ovals, and yes, Rahal did say later in the season it was one of the worst, or I think the worst oval car he'd ever driven, which was saying an awful lot after just how bad his car was in May. Yeah, it was pretty damning. It was pretty poor reflection on the team that all 3 of their full-time drivers were among the 4 that were contending to make the field, and yeah, very quickly became apparent that it would be between 2 of their drivers to see who would get bumped. And yeah, it made for a cool story for Jack Harvey with that miraculous last run, pipping Graham Rahal by the finest of margins. But the team were just absolutely nowhere on ovals. And it's interesting that they've taken Takuma Sato on board and they've continued with 4 cars at the Indy 500. Obviously, Catherine Legg last year was the only entry that actually did make the field without having to contend on bump day. So it's a matter of, you know, we'll get onto the kind of streamlining that some teams have done, but RLL have kind of gone for the knowledge and expertise of Takuma Sato, obviously a two-time winner, won with the team back in 2020 at RLL. They've gone for his expertise and knowledge over kind of streamlining and putting personnel across 3 cars as opposed to 4. So I'm intrigued to see how that works out. I think it's a risk to have 4 cars again rather than just purely focusing on 3, given just how turbulent last May was. And it's really been the focus point, I think, for the team over the off-season. Rahal, Lundgaard, they've both kind of said that, you know, the ovals have been the focus, and they didn't even really know where the issues were. So I'd assume, and it does seem that they have kind of spent the off-season really drilling into where those issues were on ovals. I know they brought some personnel in last year, some from an F1 background, for instance, and obviously with that, you don't have the oval experience as an engineer. So was that an issue? Maybe. They've added more personnel this year. No idea kind of where they've come from, but it seems, I think I remember on Content Day, Rahal and Lundgaard both spoke about kind of being confident that those additions had already made an impact and that the performance really had been found. So, yeah, really interested to see, first of all, that it's Indy, and then kind of beyond that, if they perform well there, then that's momentum going into the short ovals. However, short ovals, Superspeedway, kind of 2 different beasts. So they failed to really find performance on both last year. They've dug deep and Yeah.
So from the 16 races that RLL did on ovals last year, they actually only had one top 15 finish. So again, that sort of tells you the story of a turbulent year. And important this year, obviously, there's no Texas. That's a removal of a super speedway, which is one they really did struggle on. Finished 19th, 18th, and 24th last year. Obviously, that's gone, but you've got 2 Milwaukee races and a Nashville race. So and then we're going to have 7 over races this year, including the Indy 500, compared to 5 last year. So it's a bit more dependent on that overall package this year, particularly towards the end of the season. And I'm not going to say that they will be in leader circle trouble, but if they are, and you've got 5 short ovals in the last 7 races or whatever it was.
Yeah, 6. Is it 6 of the last
6 in
8
the last
races
8?
are on ovals,
Yeah,
something
6
like that.
in the last 8, I think. But if you get to the sort of that stage of the season and it's in the balance for leader circle, that it's not ideal. So that's something which does need to improve. And I don't think it get any worse. As you said, Sato's a big recruitment. He obviously won it with the team in 2020, so the Indy 500, I should say. And Rahal was pretty strong in 2021 until he had that tyre issue, which obviously put him out of contention. And they just need a turnaround. But Sato, very experienced. He's always been one of the favourites of the 500. He's been around several teams, Chip Ganassi Racing last year, obviously, but Andretti 2017. So his experience is vital. He's got the sort of fine tweaking about him. Yes, Sato's driving style is very different to probably what the rest of the team's like, but his experience is going to be absolutely crucial. Whether that will reflect towards the end of the season is a different matter. But obviously, with Catherine Legg last year was a bit of a left field recruitment, but Sato's got that winning experience, and he's got sort of the experience of doing the race. What's done it 12 years in a row, whatever it is. So I think he's a great addition and someone who they really need to sort of drive himself forwards in May. Whether that reflects in the end of the year, that remains to be seen. But in some ways, you think, can it really get any worse than it was last year?
Yeah, and I mean, I did this section of the piece, and I closed it with the line, matching their road and street course form on ovals could genuinely put RLL in the championship picture. And I don't think that was necessarily an exaggeration, really, because yes, they were extremely good on road courses last year. And I suppose last time out Thermal, as much as it was a non-championship event, they kind of showed that, getting all of their drivers into the main event. Struggled a bit on the street course at St. Pete. That was disappointing because it did feel like they were kind of on a bit of an upward trajectory on street courses. Obviously, Lundgaard got that win in Toronto, so maybe a few questions to be asked there. I think on reflection, maybe they won't quite be in the championship picture, but especially on road courses, they showed championship form. They were arguably the best team at times. Obviously, Rahal taking 2 poles, Lundgaard taking a pole. Rahal should have won a race. Lundgaard definitely should have been on the podium a few times. So, yeah, I think they just need to crack ovals, and then they could really be in that conversation with your likes of Andretti almost.
There was also that race really randomly last year. I think it was Iowa race 2. Rahal qualified 6th and then sort of felt like a lead balloon in the actual race itself. So, there is potential there. It's not like it's all been lost, but they need a turnaround in that aspect. So whether that will come, I think that's quite important, because if you're a driver looking to step up, yes, Rahal are a great team for the road street courses, but if you're looking, a championship picture, a regular racing team, and not an attractive proposition, if at one of the 3 disciplines they're pretty much useless. So it's one that they really need to turn around. As I said, I think they will improve, but it's one to keep your eye out for the rest of the season. Let's go on to something we touched on quite a lot in the pre-season, which is obviously to do with the driver market. So we'll start off with what we labelled the host of driver transfers. Several moves obviously going on off season. Ericsson to Andretti, Grosjean to Hunkos, Rosenqvist to Meyer Shank, Stingray Robb to AJ Foyt Racing, Malukas to McLaren. Since we've obviously had Jack Harvey to Dale Coyne Racing, so there's been a whole host of driver transfers as mentioned. We won't go too much on this because we've obviously touched it quite a lot in previous episodes, but a lot of exciting moves to keep your eye out for. Obviously, Felix Rosenqvist has made the best start out of all of them, taking home 7th place at St. Petersburg as well as the front row, as well as 3rd in the $1 million challenge. So he's really surprised many people so far, and even the likes of Romain Grosjean has been more impressive than we expected. which is really encouraging. And obviously we're still yet to see David Malukas, who probably maybe was the most highly anticipated one. So lots of different ones to look out for, so we won't go into it too much, but a lot of drivers who are making exciting moves, which hopefully should add a new element to the season.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the one that people was kind of most looking forward to, at least myself, was the David Malukas one, and we haven't really seen him do anything so far just because of his injury. So just for him to kind of get better, and hopefully he'll be in the next race or whenever he can be, but he can only do that whenever he's fully healed. He can't come back when he's mostly done, just so he doesn't risk any further injury. The team won't want to risk that, and he definitely won't want to risk that as much as he would want to be coming back as soon as possible. So yeah, as soon as that's kind of all healed up, he'll be back, and then we can actually see what he does, and hopefully he can kind of keep up with the rest of the field for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think NBC coined it new faces and new places, didn't they? And to be fair, I do agree that the new faces and new places have done pretty well so far. I think Rosenqvist has been the one that's taken me by surprise the most, really thriving in that team leader setting, as we've said. Grosjean as well has really shown pace, and Hunkos have been pretty competitive. Not results to show for it, but that's promising. I think we're yet to see much from Marcus Ericsson. Obviously had to retire in St. Pete, and Andretti were pretty slow at thermal, so not entirely sure there. We've obviously had Coyne. I think that might have been that was the final storyline that we might get onto a little bit, but I mean, we still don't know who's going to race at Long Beach. We still don't know who their second driver at the Indy 500 is going to be, so that's still something to look at in terms of driver transfers. But yeah, Harvey to Coyne has worked out decently well. It's been a solid start. Yeah, Malukas, I think, is the one that's really a bit of an unknown, and especially now he comes in after having missed a couple of events and just not got much testing time under his belt, not got the seat time of other drivers, and kind of will be forced to play catch up. So yeah, interesting, I think. And yeah, Stingray Rob's the other one, and I think there's still more to prove for him as well.
I think Malukas going into Long Beach will be quite an interesting one, because again, we don't know where he stacks up. He was super impressive at Coyne, particularly when it comes to the short ovals, but he's still a bit of an unknown in some sense. So will he make the step up at McLaren? How will he perform against the likes of Alexander Rossi and Pato O'Ward? We know McLaren have been looking at many young faces to fill their teams in future years. So it'll be quite intriguing to see how Malukas gets on, as we sort of touched on pre-season, and we think he could really be a competitor towards the end of the season when he's got those 6 short ovals and 8 races, a discipline he really does excel at. So really looking forward to seeing how Malukas performs there. And yeah, just about waiting for Long Beach, because I think out of all the drivers who moved teams, he potentially was the biggest question mark. So it's one which is going to be anticipated by a lot of people, and hopefully one that he really can thrive in that sort of environment. As we said, a lot of new faces in new places, and of course there is no way to buy your merch for them, or is there? Because the DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast is proudly sponsored by Formula Model Shop, the best way to get any IndyCar merchandise, not only in the UK, but to all our European viewers.
You can use the discount code 5BOMB, or one word, FIVEBOMB, to gain 5% off products on the FMS site. Visit the Instagram highlights on the DIVEBOMB Motorsport Instagram for a link to an exclusive VIP section on the FMS store, courtesy of DIVEBOMB.
You can find the FMS site via a banner on the DIVEBOMB website, or by visiting formulamodelshop.co.uk.
Stay tuned for exclusive giveaways, events, and other content.
And obviously, as we said, the one we don't really know is Dale Coyne Racing, which is the one we'll go on to next. We know the 18 car is Jack Harvey for 14 races. We saw Nolan Siegel make his debut in thermal, but he's going to be doing obviously the Indy 500, Toronto, and Long Beach actually. So we'll see him next time out as well. And obviously, I had Colin Brown make his IndyCar debut at St. Petersburg in thermal, with the intention to run more races later in the year if they deemed it fit. But we don't really know. There's been suggestions that Catherine Legg will be at the Indy 500, potentially the rest of the other oval races, but there's still several other road course races to decide what they're going to do there. And there's no real picture. I don't think it was a good look on Coyne announcing their drivers 2 days before the season opener in St. Petersburg. And they still haven't sorted out sponsors for their 51 car, which has been left blank for the first 2 races. The 18 car was left blank for thermal, and it must be tough for the team, must be tough for the personnel behind it. But at the end of the day, you've got Jack Carey's bringing a lot of experience. Nolan Siegel is the highly anticipated prospect from Indy next. So I think for Coyne, it's going to be not a write-off year, but it's a year that they can't really take too much into account. They're obviously looking more at 2025 with what seems very likely for Nolan Siegel to do a full-time schedule, and hopefully they find someone else to really solidify in that 51 car. And for their sake, I hope they do, because they're a team who've won races. Obviously one of Sebastian Bourdais in 2018. Malukas has shone in that team in recent years. You've had the likes of Grosjean and Palou who've really impressed in Coyne. So it's not a team who are completely useless. They have had a big say in the series, and you don't really want this season to be written off for them, but sort of the way they are chopping and changing, it's not really easy to have much of a positive outlook this year.
Yeah, they're really kind of the epitome of the small team that could, and I think there will definitely be more to this off-season story of quite a lot of uncertainty that meets the eye. Seemingly, they just didn't. I don't know. That's the simple thing. I don't know what happened. It's been typical of them at times to leave it pretty late, but it did all seem a little bit chaotic, especially having Brown on a 2-race deal, not having any contingency plan and knowing what they're going to do going forward. And yeah, I think, as you said, it probably is going to end up being a write-off year, really. I think Siegel started phenomenally at Thermal. I think he did the test visit at Homestead beforehand and was pretty faster than Harvey, in fact, kind of mid-pack of those that ran on the day. So that was a good start for him, but Coyne might fear that almost he's performing too well and he's almost putting himself in the shop window for other teams rather than being an option for them in 2025, because I think it does kind of seem that they are testing options, or maybe they're not testing options. Maybe this is what they're having to do in order to maximize, I don't know, getting into the leaders circle or sponsorship, because Catherine Legg is a solid bet, especially for the Indy 500 last year. She did a really good job to outqualify all of her Rahal, Lesserman, Lanigan teammates. Colin Brown has also run ovals before in some of the NASCAR series. I think it might be Trucks or Xfinity. She's got a bit of experience in that regard, but yeah, I think Legg's a good bet. I wouldn't mind seeing her there. I think Harvey is a steady pair of hands. Obviously, it didn't work out too well from RLL, but I think he's a good enough pair of hands. He's reliable, and hopefully, kind of with a bit more seat time, he can start to develop a bit of that Meyershank racing form again. But yes, okay, while chopping and changing drivers, maybe they are aiming to get specialists on different track types, but I think rotating drivers isn't ideal for the team. Doesn't allow any rhythm to be gained, doesn't allow relationships to kind of be formed, especially if it looks like that is what might happen on the 51 car. There's still no clarity about whether Brown will return at Long Beach. I thought he did pretty well across his 2 events. I think he reduced the gap pretty well at Thermal. It was a track I think he had a bit of experience from. I don't know whether it's, I think maybe driver coaching or something. He had run there before, but considering the length of the track, in St. Pete, he was about a second off, and that gap was lower on a much longer track at Thermal. So it was decent. He was making decent gains. So maybe we'll see Brown back for a bit. Legg for the ovals, possibly, as you say, but the uncertainty can't be benefiting them at all. It doesn't allow those bonds to be made with the team, and yeah, it's kind of unfair on the personnel. It's unfair on the drivers. It's just not an ideal situation there.
I think you talk about kind of it's unfair on like the personnel, but I think it's also hard for kind of fans, I feel like, to kind of get a bond with them, if that makes sense. Because at the beginning of the year, with not knowing that who's going to be driving, everything like this, I feel like it was easy to kind of forget that they were like driving and that they were racing. But I think if they're always kind of switching out drivers and kind of changing them, this race it's this one, this race it's this person, I think kind of if you're talking about casual viewers, it's going to be harder for them to kind of get involved. But still, it's just the confusion kind of for everyone is just, I don't really know how to say it. It's just confusing, really. It's what it is, and I think kind of watching it, like you said, it might just be a year that they've written off maybe a little bit, unless kind of they get them full-time drivers in.
I think the other issue you've almost got is in the 51 car, yes, signing people like Leg is all good, but you almost feel like they want to be a bit more adventurous. There's been rumours of the likes of Devlin DiFrancesco or Benjamin Pedersen stepping into that seat, for example, but you feel, if you're in the situation you're in, if you're going to get people on one race deals, you might as well be a bit braver with it. Get someone from Formula 2, for example, bring someone over from NASCAR, bring someone over from, like a Van Gisbergen NASCAR style thing. Bring a variety of drivers where, actually there might be a chance they have a one-off and really stand out. Because if you're sort of doing one-offs of IndyCar vets, yes, it might be better from a leader circle perspective, but when you look at it, I don't really see many circumstances where they are getting into the leader circle if they are going to be chopping and changing. So I almost feel like signing people like Leg might be all good in that, but be more adventurous with it, I think, is what I'd say to Coyne, because I think number 18 car, completely get it. Get Siegel in as sort of preparation for 2025. Have Jack Harvey as his sort of mentor. But you want to be bold, I think, in that second car. There's no point just signing vets because you're not going to really benefit loads from it, especially the likes of Devlin DiFrancesco and Benjamin Pedersen.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up that leader circle point as well. Are they actually going to realistically make the leader circle when you've got this kind of lack of continuity, this lack of kind of consistency within the team, this kind of continued lack of clarity? I think it looks like a tricky prospect anyway. So, yeah, why not? I think someone I would throw out there is Oliver Askew. Why not give him a second chance? He obviously tested for Ed Carpenter Racing. They were more impressed by kind of the proposition of taking Christian Rasmussen on board, fresh off his Indy Next title, but it obviously ended, or I guess kind of petered out a bit for Oliver Askew with his injury issues, the concussion issues. So I'd like to see him given another chance because we know how talented he is, for instance. So I think I like the signing of Harvey. I think he's another that was kind of in that Askew boat where another chance was needed, but I get what you mean about trying to be more adventurous because there are options out there that are adventurous and you can take a gamble on them and it could work out brilliantly. They've taken a bit of a gamble on Siegel. He's only in the midst of his second Indy Next campaign and so far so good on that front. He's been really competitive, kind of running up and almost getting into that main race at Thermal. So that sort of thing, I guess I want to see more of from them, and I completely agree with your point.
Let's do one more on driver transfers, which is upsizing and streamlining. There's mainly links to Andretti downsizing to 3 cars and Chip Ganassi Racing going to 5 cars. I think the story for this was, will Andretti benefit from going to 3 cars? We know they've sort of had a turbulent 2 or 3 years. They haven't really maximised what they've got, but now they've got a driver lineup, which their suggestions they've locked in until 2026. Don't know if that can be verified or not, but there's suggestions there. And Chip Ganassi Racing, a dominant force, obviously expanding to 5 by getting Clifford Simpson in the 4 car. So there's varying perspectives. From an Andretti perspective, they think, downsizing to 3 cars means you can focus more personnel on certain cars, give a bit more attention to your current drivers. And, the 4 cars didn't work last year. Whilst Ganassi, they sort of believe the more cars you have, the more data you have, which can be shared around, which might lead to better performances. So it's a real mix. Obviously, Andretti is sort of focusing longer term with their driver lineup, whilst Ganassi have sort of got a big youth exuberance in their driver lineup. So 2 varying contrasts there in regards to 2 of the top players in IndyCar.
Yeah, I guess we're not really going to know exactly how this is going to work out until probably the end of the season. It's going to be something that kind of emerges over the longer term. And yeah, there've been questions to the drivers, and they've kind of just brushed it off and said, yeah, it's early days. As you've said, kind of the Ganassi side of things is very much the view that it's more data. Yeah, maybe I think Dixon mentioned on content day that there's more things going on. It could possibly be more difficult to make sure everyone's happy, but Pallot's very insistent. Yeah, maybe the debriefs take a bit longer, but we've got more data and that's going to benefit us. I think maybe a bit of concern was elicited when Ganassi struggled a little bit at St. Pete, but they kind of bounced back at thermal if you can really take much from that. So yeah, don't know how that's going to work out. It's obviously really bold going to 5 cars. They are, if any team, the team that will be able to carry it out, like pull it off. You look at Penske, regarded as one of the best operations, going from 4 to 3 for them worked a treat. And Ganassi going from 4 to 5 and kind of going up one it's a gamble, especially bringing in Kiffin Simpson, who kind of lacks experience. I think he's performed better than people expected so far, but it's certainly a risk. Then I think on the Andretti front, we've spoken a lot, haven't we? That, there've been, as well as driver errors, some team errors as well, and some inconsistencies on the team front as well as the driver front. And they now have a very consistent lineup, or at least Ericsson has brought consistency where maybe Grosjean and Di Francesco lacked that. And hopefully with more personnel spread across fewer cars, more focus, kind of less workload, there will be less of those kind of costly mistakes. Then Ed Carpenter Racing were kind of the other team who did this on a much smaller scale, dropping that extra car on all of the non-Indy 500 oval races, I think for similar reasons, really. So yeah, we'll see how that works out too.
Let's highlight a storyline that I brought up as one, which I found quite interesting. So the youth movement part 2. So looking back at 2021, 3 seasons ago, it was sort of a period in IndyCar where a lot was changing, and part of that was this youth movement. Alex Palou set up to Chip Ganassi, Pato O'Ward took an increased presence at Aaron McLaren. You had Colton Herta again, increased presence at Andretti, and Vidas Vico really stepping up at Ed Carpenter Racing that year. All 4 of them winning races that season. Palou and O'Ward were the 2 championship contenders, and it was sort of this new crop of IndyCar where the likes of Scott Dixon, Joseph Newgarden were sort of stepped aside for these new youth movements, as what was referred to by NBC. And I can sort of see something similar potentially happening in 2024. You've got Carl Kirkwood, who really had some stand-up moments last year, and then you've got likes of David Malukas, Linus Lundqvist, Christian Lundgaard, who Marcus Armstrong can add to that equation as well, who are drivers who've joined the series recently but have so much potential and could certainly be up there on a regular basis in 2024 and again challenge these established likes. And you can add the likes of Palou and O'Ward to these established names now, and can they be in the mix more than we expect them to? And at the end of the day, we won't see the likes of Scott Dixon and Will Power forever. We're going to need these new young guns to step up, and this year could be a great opportunity for some of them to do so.
I think it's a really interesting angle, actually, because, Kirkwood, for instance, let's take him for kind of, first of all, I almost think he's kind of the leader of this youth movement part 2, as you've coined it, because he outperformed Colton Herta last year. Yeah, finished marginally behind him in the championship, but he had the highest level of performance, if you can understand what I'm saying there. I think he's the leader of this charge, but then there's certainly other interesting and intriguing facets to it. Obviously, Malukas, as we've spoken about, what can he produce at Aaron McLaren? Then you've got the Linus Lundqvist factor, because he was so strong at Meyershank Racing when he had those 3 initial races, and I guess St. Pete was a little bit of a slow burner, but he backed it up and impressed at thermal. So yeah, Armstrong, Simpson as well. And I think Lundgaard, to be fair, is the other one I'd put kind of in the bracket with Kirkwood. I mean, I think this is a contract year for him. If RLL can't get firing on all cylinders, there will be teams after Christian Lundgaard, because he is hot. He is a hot prospect. He's a hot proposition, and whether that be Aaron McLaren or a Penske even, he feels like an archetypal Penske driver almost already. So yeah, really interesting angle to kind of look at it from, and I think it's a really interesting thing to follow. Yeah,
it's one where you've got a lot of young drivers in top teams, which is what sort of happened in 2021 with likes of Palou, Herta and O'Ward, funnily enough, in all different teams. And again, you sort of got that. You've got Lundqvist, Armstrong and the Ganassi, you've got Malukas and the McLaren, you've got Kirkwood and the Penske, and they've got some great names to learn from. Alex Palou, Scott Dixon, Pato O'Ward, they've got a whole Marcus Ericsson in Carl Kirkwood's case. And obviously, Lundgaard's was sort of been leading that charge for Rahal Letterman Lanigan. And I think from where I sort of saw it is these are names sort of trying to break themselves into IndyCar's lead out group. And, you don't become a championship contender overnight. And this is what they sort of want to do. They sort of want to challenge these likes. And I do think it's harder. I think the talent level of the series is a lot higher than it was, let's say, 5 years ago. But they are drivers who I can see join this leading group, and 2024 I can really see it as a breakout year for some of these drivers. Right, let's go on to our penultimate storyline, the inaugural Nashville finale with a twist. Obviously, it broke out just before the season. Funnily enough, the storyline episode was supposed to go out that the Streets of Nashville wouldn't be able to host the season finale just due to the changes of the Tennessee Titans Stadium, which is where the paddock was based, and obviously was right next to the pit lane. They were planning a new layout for this anyway, but it was still sort of seen as unfeasible to host the race there. So they moved it to Nashville Superspeedway, which is about 40 miles away from Nashville, which is a sort of mid-range oval, not short oval, but not sort of Superspeedway, sort of in the middle, although it's called Superspeedway, but it's quite short. First race there since 2008, obviously will host the season finale. First oval to host the season finale since 2013 or something like that. Something around
10 plus years.
Yeah, it's about 10 years ago. So it seemed like a bit of a last minute change, but the organisers of Nashville, specifically Scott Borchetta, did a fantastic job at making this happen. They're trying to make it so it's still a Nashville event. All the festivities will still take place in Nashville. All sort of the events and the pre-race build-up will happen in Nashville. But the actual season finale itself will go to Superspeedway, which is a bit of an interesting aspect. Oval racing is, let's be honest, a bit more unpredictable. It might be an interesting dynamic as a season finale, and it looks like it might be the future home for IndyCar and Nashville for years to come.
Yeah, I think you can kind of simultaneously almost bash and also then commend other individuals, because let's get it right. This was a bit of a disaster that I think it was in December that Scott Borchetta took over in kind of a leadership role for the event. He's the CEO of Big Machine Label Group, or I think are some sort of musical agency. I don't know how else to describe it. But he took over in December, and immediately his first action was to launch a review into whether the event actually taking place was feasible, because the initial organisers, promoters, I don't know exactly how to term it, but they had decided that this event was going to be able to continue despite the sort of major construction on a new Tennessee Titans Stadium. But Borchetta was very keen to point out that the Titans Stadium does take precedence, and unfortunately it just was not really reasonable that the event could continue downtown, because as well as the construction work, there wasn't going to be enough room to house the teams and the hospitality and everything that comes with this IndyCar circus. So yeah, this was somehow not determined by the previous organisers, which is not a good look. But I think Borchetta then, as we've spoken about in depth, maybe it was off-seasoning episode 10, maybe.
It was the last off-seasoning, I think.
I think it was off-seasoning part 10, if you want to go very in-depth on this. But it was really shrewd from Borchetta after the kind of, I guess, misjudgment from the previous organisers. It was very shrewd from him to move the race to the nearby oval. Yes, it's not ideal. It's a bit out of town, but it's good that they're kind of keeping downtown as the centre of kind of the event, with all the party and everything else, all of the festivities and everything that comes with this being the final race of the championship, because there was such excitement about, they were going to be racing down the iconic Broadway in Nashville, and that's just come kind of all tumbling down. So yeah, it's not ideal logistically, but at least they figured something out. And you know what? An oval finale, exciting. The racing, we don't know what to expect. It's a long time. I think 2008, last time they were at Nashville Superspeedway. Well, the 1.33 mile Superspeedway. So not quite Superspeedway, as you said, Dan. But yeah, it's a very good contingency plan. And it does seem that, for as long as this construction takes, which looks to be, I don't think it's set to finish until 2027, we could be seeing Nashville Superspeedway on the calendar for a while. And yeah, credits to Scott Borchetta for kind of stepping up and preventing what could have been a bit of a disaster come September if it was suddenly realised, oh my word, we can't actually house this event, we haven't got enough room.
Yeah. And then we have a season finale, which wasn't expected to be a season finale. And, you know, credit to him. I think it is a bit of a shame the way IndyCar promoted this event was it's going to be a real spectacle on the streets of Nashville going down Broadway. It isn't going to happen. You know, sort of the bridge again was one of the key highlights. And there's almost a sort of belief where we won't actually go back to the street circuit, which I think is one which is controversially welcomed by many. I think sort of the crash aspect of it, the unpredictability of it was a bit ridiculous. So I can see why people are like that. But again, I think the cooler thing is we're going to be having a season finale on an oval and a racetrack that the majority of the drivers haven't been to before, which is quite exciting. So that's obviously one to keep your eye out. And let's move on to our last storyline, which actually links into some of the news from this week, which is the hybrid switchover. We haven't really had too much updates on it since the initial one where it was going to be delayed. It was obviously intended to be implemented for St. Petersburg, but they sort of realised they needed more development. So implementation was delayed at some point after the Indy 500. We haven't got official word yet, interestingly enough, but there is a belief it will be mid-Ohio. So stay tuned for that one. But I think there's two storylines here. The first one is, will the hybrid be a success? It's almost one which is being phased out by many motorsport series, and the World Rally Championships one, for example. But the hybrid is one where I think it's a bit overdue. Formula One did it 10 years ago, and the likes of the IMSA Sports Car Championship have done it as well. So will it be a success for IndyCar? We know it's got heavier technologies which may affect the handling of the cars, and that's sort of one aspect to it. And the other aspect to it is it coming in mid-season, at some point potentially after mid-Ohio. Will that change the pecking order? We know the likes of Ganassi, McLaren, Andretti, and Penske have had the majority of the testing. The other teams got their first test this week, actually. But will it change the pecking order at all? Will some team be better with the increased weight? Will some teams adapt to the hybrid better than others? Will it change the pecking order midway through the season?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpick, and we'll kind of do it in a bite-sized fashion. But I think the drivers are supposedly going to get more control. It will add more kind of strategy to races. I think push to pass, I'm right in saying, is remaining. However, they will also get now what is essentially like F1's ERS, energy recovery system, where they can kind of have an unlimited deployment, but they obviously have to recharge the battery and then they deploy it. And then, yeah, that's kind of the strategic element, the addition of more control. But yeah, I think the mid-season edition is certainly contentious. I think the kind of implementation of the hybrid overall is contentious in the minds of some drivers, but will be fascinating because I think a lot of teams are speaking about the season as in a pre-hybrid and a post-hybrid period. I think it was noted during the testing at Thermal that teams were really just focusing on this pre-hybrid portion of the season. Alexander Rossi, I think, was one that noted that the actual hybrid portion of the season, obviously with the late season kind of swing of ovals, 6 of the last 8 races, a lot of the use of the hybrid will actually end up being on ovals this year. Again, just another kind of interesting thing to come with it. Yeah, there's an awful lot to unpick. I think the imbalance of testing time with Penske, Ganassi, Aaron McLaren and Andretti getting the vast bulk of testing time and a lot of testing time. There are a lot of miles put in and I think increasingly successful miles as well. I think issues were kind of ironed out through the off-season. And then, yeah, it was only the week just gone that the remainder of the teams on the IMS road course got their first taste of the hybrid. As per IndyCar, they notched, I think, 988 combined laps. I think it was 13 drivers or something. I think off the top of my head, quick maths. But yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I think it is not fair, the imbalance. Well, it's not fair, the imbalance of testing time. It's understandable. It's unfair, but it's understandable because you want the best teams or the kind of the teams with the greatest resources and therefore the greatest personnel doing the testing. So I understand why they've done it that way. It doesn't mean it's fair. I think it does put other teams at a disadvantage. And yeah, it will just be interesting to see whether it does kind of cause a swing in the championship come Mid-Ohio, when I think even all of the drivers are now saying Mid-Ohio is the time where it's going to happen. So that's the expectation. I'm not sure about a mid-season edition. I'm really not. It kind of does feel like two separate championships happening in the year, but we'll kind of see how big an impact it has when we get to that period, really. But yeah, drivers seem to be, I think it's taken them, well, the drivers that have just run in the last few days, I think Graham Rahal said in a quote on IndyCar.com that it's kind of a lot to understand, to kind of get to grips with. I think especially for drivers that haven't used a hybrid, say in IMSA or, I don't know, in Formula One, for instance. So yeah, there's a hell of a lot to unpick. Mid-season introduction is the big thing. Will it be fair? Will it change anything? We'll find out when that comes about, really. I think the reason it was delayed was due to supply chain issues rather than kind of concerns over whether the hybrid would be reliable. I think it is now at a stage where it's fairly reliable. Obviously, IMSA introduced it last year. Everyone expected that no GTP cars would finish the first race of the season. There would be an LMP2 winner, and it all turned out fine. So I think there's confidence on that side. But yeah, there's a lot for drivers to get kind of up to speed with, especially for the teams that have only just started testing this week.
I think as well, like you said, it might kind of change the pecking order of the championship, but I would like to know kind of which drivers and which teams are going to get sorted with it and kind of adapt to it quicker, because when they're racing, some teams could adapt to it quicker than others, and then obviously because it's halfway, will be like halfway through the season, they won't kind of have the rest of the season to kind of catch up and to kind of deal with it the way that they would a full season. So I would be interested to kind of see if that would change it like as much as you'd think it might, because it's like I said, there's going to be drivers that are going to get adapted to it quicker than others, and then who knows, there's nothing, like they don't have the full season, and some drivers have kind of the season where they kind of have a bad start or they have a good start and then it changes at the end. They can't do that with the hybrid. They can't kind of see that, and the only way that they're going to be able to see is next season. So I just would kind of like to see how they get on and how they kind of finish the season, and if drivers get used to it quicker and stuff like that.
It's one where mid-season will be controversial. I think there is a belief that it will happen mid-season. Some people suggest it might be better for 2025. So we'll see what comes out of it. It will be almost a two-season championship. We might have to have like a pre-hybrid championship standings and a post-hybrid championship standings. Might be quite interesting. So we'll see what works out of that. But that's going to be one which is still work in progress. I'm not sure if there's any more testing planned for it. I might be wrong, but I don't know of any. So
no, not sure. No, not sure. I think one thing I also want to note from the test actually is that, again, quoted on IndyCar.com, Rinus VeeKay noted. I don't know if it was actually quoted, but this is something that came to kind of fruition, was that Rinus VeeKay successfully started the car from within the cockpit rather than using an external starter, which is, I think, something we've kind of briefly mentioned, that the AMR safety crew have often had to kind of reboot cars, but they can now restart themselves. So yeah, that's something. I think I would like to see more testing time, hybrid testing time for the teams that haven't had the bulk of the testing over the off season, just for, again, the sake of fairness. Yeah, that's kind of my take on it. It's also, I think, should we just note as well, there were also some team tests ongoing during the hybrid testing period. Was it Penske, Andretti, and Ed Carpenter Racing, I think, also did team tests on the IMS road course because they didn't take the opportunity to test at Barber pre-thermal. And there was also a rookie orientation program for Nolan Siegel, Christian Rasmussen, and
Kevin Simpson.
There we go, at Texas Motor Speedway, because they didn't do it at IMS back in October. So they are now cleared to race in the Indy 500, or attempt to qualify for the Indy 500.
Anyway, there's some storylines to follow for the 2024 season. Yes, we are one round in, but there's still 16 rounds to go. There's still a lot to follow. Still 3 weeks to Long Beach, so there will be something next week. We don't quite know what yet, but there will be something, so stay tuned. Hopefully it might be something good or exclusive. You never know.
Yeah, maybe give us your questions if you have any questions for us. We're looking for things to fill the time with in this early seasoning, mid-seasoning. I don't know what we want to call it.
Yeah, sort of. early season, something like that. Anyway, if you've got any other ideas, please feel free to send them, because your ideas might be better than ours. You are a very talented fan base of the DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast. So please DM us at DIVEBOMB Motorsport, Instagram at DIVEBOMB Sport on Twitter. DM us whatever you want to do. Comment on our posts. Give us suggestions. Give us things you want to see on the podcast, and we will try our best to fulfil them. But that's the storylines from 2024, for 2024, I should say. A lot to follow, a lot of exciting bits to look out for the rest of the season, in addition to all the on-track action. So as we said, thank you very much for watching, thanks to you very much for listening, and we will see you next time.